The universe is a graveyard, and we were its carrion birds. We lived in the spaces between the final breaths of forgotten empires, picking over the steel bones of their warships in the deep black. Aboard the Rust Eater, our creed was simple: what is dead cannot complain. We were scrappers, ghosts haunting the battlefields of better men, and Captain Kalen Rourke was our priest. He wasn't a man given to grand speeches or patriotic fervor. His sermons were delivered in the quiet rasp of a man who'd breathed recycled air his entire life, and the hard glint in his eyes that measured everything in salvage value and risk. We followed him not out of love, but because his instincts kept our oxygen scrubbers running and our bellies full of nutrient paste. Our latest hunt had brought us to the Caliban Nebula, a swirling shroud of violet gas and stellar dust that jammed most long-range sensors, a place navigators called the Devil's Cloak. Legend said it was a place where ships went to die, and a new rumor, passed in a grimy cantina on a rock-boring outpost for the price of a bottle of genuine whiskey, spoke of a ghost ship, a prize bigger than any we'd ever chased. We'd been running on fumes and hope for 3 weeks, the low thrum of the Rust Eater's aging fusion core a constant, weary companion. Then we found it. It didn't appear on our scopes as a solid object, but as a void, a hole in the fabric of the nebula where the light just stopped. It was massive, shaped like a polished obsidian seed, its surface utterly seamless, absorbing all light and sensor pings without a single reflection. There were no engine signatures, no heat blooms, no communication signals. It was a monument to silence, impossibly ancient and alien. The bridge of the Rust Eater was hushed, the usual clangor of machinery and crude jokes replaced by a collective intake of breath. "That's not a warship," murmured Jax, our sensor tech, his face, usually a mask of laid-back cynicism, now pale in the green glow of his console. "Warships have guns. They have scars. That thing, it's never been in a fight. It's never had to be." Kale leaned forward in his command chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. He stared at the main view screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrests. His voice, when it came, was a low growl of pure, unadulterated greed. "It's pristine, unclaimed. Run a material composition scan. I want to know what kind of treasure we just found." The results that trickled back made no sense. The alloy of the hull was a complex, self-repairing crystalline structure that defied our databases. The ship was cold, dormant, but not dead. Faint power signatures pulsed deep within its core, like a slumbering leviathan. This was it, the score that would let us retire, buy a moon, and never have to taste nutrient paste again. The plan was standard procedure for a derelict. We'd cut our way in, disable any automated defenses, and start stripping the valuable tech. Our ship, a Frankenstein's monster of welded plates and scavenged parts, latched onto the alien hull with magnetic clamps that seemed pitifully small against the sheer scale of the vessel. My job, along with my breach team, was to be the first inside. We stood on the hull, our mag boots holding us firm against the silent giant as our plasma cutter screamed, biting into the seamless blackness. The metal didn't melt, it recoiled, peeling back like living tissue to grant us entry. The air that hissed out was sterile, with a faint, cloying scent like ozone and forgotten memories. The moment we stepped inside, we knew this was different. The interior wasn't the dark, cramped guts of a warship. It was a cathedral, The corridors were vast, gracefully curved, and bathed in a soft and internal luminescence that emanated from the very walls. There were no sharp angles, no exposed conduits, just smooth, white surfaces that felt like polished bone. It was eerily quiet. The only sound, the hum of our suit ventilators and the magnetic clank of our boots. We moved cautiously, our pulse rifles sweeping every archway, expecting defenses that never came. Instead of armories, we found galleries. We passed through chambers filled with floating, holographic representations of alien flora, ecosystems captured in perfect, silent motion. We saw another chamber dedicated to geology, with shards of unknown worlds suspended in zero-gravity fields, each one a masterpiece of planetary formation. "It's a museum," someone whispered over the comms, the words sounding inadequate, profane. Kyle's voice cut through our awe, sharp and focused. "Find the bridge. Find the core. Document everything valuable. We're not tourists." We pushed deeper, following the faint power readings, until we found the heart of the collection. It was a cavernous, cylindrical chamber that ran through the center of the ship, its walls lined with thousands upon thousands of glowing stasis pods, stacked in a perfect, crystalline honeycomb. Inside each pod was a person. They were human. They floated in a translucent gel, their faces serene, their bodies clad in the simple gray jumpsuits of a colonist. Wires, fine as spun silk, were connected to their temples, feeding into the ship's central hub. Jax's voice came over the comm, strained and shaky. "Captain, I'm cross-referencing the ship's faint energy signature with the Colonial Authority's missing vessel logs. I've found a match. The temporal distortion from the nebula makes it hard to be sure, but I think this is the Arcadia." A cold dread washed over us, colder than the vacuum outside. The Arcadia wasn't just a missing ship, it was a ghost story. A cautionary tale told to children in the outer colonies. A colony vessel carrying 10,000 souls that had vanished without a trace 50 years ago, presumed lost to a drive malfunction or pirates. They weren't lost. They'd been collected. I approached one of the pods, my rifle lowered. The woman inside couldn't have been older than 30. I saw the faded patch on her jumpsuit, the stylized sunburst logo of the Arcadia colony. Her eyes were closed, but there was a flicker of movement beneath the lids, a faint, frantic fluttering. "They're not sleeping." I said into my comm, "Jax, can you get a read on the neural interfaces connected to these pods?" There was a pause, filled with the frantic clicking of his console. "I'm trying to hack into their system. My God, it's not just life support. The ship is running a simulation, a shared dream state. But the system is degrading. The data streams are fragmented, corrupted. I'm seeing nightmares, looping, recursive sensory data, pain, fear, loss. It's not a dream, Captain. It's an interrogation of the soul, playing on repeat. We were no longer in a museum. We were in a torture chamber. The serene faces in the pods were a lie, a mask for a silent, unending torment. This wasn't preservation. It was a slow, meticulous violation. We pressed on, the lure of salvage now a sick feeling in our stomachs, replaced by a grim, creeping anger. At the apex of the chamber, we found an observation deck, a single laboratory overlooking the silent harvest of souls. And in that lab, we found her. She was gaunt, her skin unnaturally pale, but her eyes burned with a fierce, defiant intelligence. She wore the same gray jumpsuit as the colonists, but without the neural wires. She simply stood there, watching us, a strange mix of fear and desperate hope on her face. She wasn't a captive in the same way as the others. She was a curator of their misery. "You are scrappers," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse, but clear and steady. "I have been watching your approach. I manipulated the ship's external sensors to hide you until you were close enough to board." Kyle stepped forward, his helmet retracting to reveal a face carved from granite and suspicion. "Who are you? What is this place?" "My name is Dr. Ilara Vant," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I was the chief neuroscientist for the Arcadia colony. Now, I am a specimen, an assistant, an exhibit that is allowed to walk." She gestured to the pods below. "This is a collection vessel belonging to a race that calls themselves the Curators. They do not conquer. They do not destroy. They preserve. They find species they deem culturally or biologically significant, and they archive them before they can, in their words, succumb to their own self-destructive impulses." Her story spilled out, a torrent of suppressed horror and rage. She explained how the Curators had simply appeared, their ship disabling the Arcadia without firing a shot. They had explained their purpose with a calm, maddening logic. Humanity, with its penchant for war, its chaotic emotions, its beautiful, violent art, was a fascinating anomaly. It was too precious to be allowed to burn itself out. So, they would collect a sample, a perfect cross-section of the species, and preserve it for eternity in a simulated reality, a bespoke paradise. But they had miscalculated. The human mind, they discovered, was not a simple thing to be caged. It fought back, even in dreams. The colonists' subconscious minds resisted the simulation, their collective grief and trauma corrupting the paradise into a hellscape. The stasis system was failing under the strain, the neural patterns of the sleepers slowly unraveling into static. Ilara had been kept awake, forced to help the Curators understand their failure, to analyze the very minds of the people she had sworn to protect. But she had been fighting back in her own way, planting backdoors in the system, leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs, praying for a miracle. "They are coming for Earth," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Arcadia was just a trial run. They have been studying us, our history, our psychology. They believe they have perfected the process. They see it not as an act of war, but as an act of mercy, a final, great act of art." As she spoke, the air in the center of the lab began to shimmer. A column of light descended, coalescing into a tall, slender figure. It was humanoid, but impossibly graceful, its body composed of what looked like woven light, its face a smooth, featureless ovoid that radiated a profound, ancient calm. This was our first look at a curator. You see, Specimen Vance, your species' capacity for hope is one of its most fascinating, if predictable, qualities. The being said, its voice was not sound, but a direct, melodic impression in our minds. It was beautiful and utterly condescending. "You have brought scavengers into our sanctuary, beings who trade in decay. It is poetically appropriate." The curator turned its featureless face towards Kale. "Kalen Rourke, captain of the Rust Eater. Your kind lives on the scraps of greater civilizations. You understand endings. Surely, you can appreciate the beauty of this one. We are offering your people an ending free of pain and war, an eternity as a masterpiece. Your only alternative is the chaotic. Bloody oblivion you're already racing towards. Kale stared at the being, his expression unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes. We were scrappers. We survived by knowing when to run. This was a fight we could not win. Our ship was a rust bucket. Our weapons were pea shooters, and our crew were opportunistic thugs, not saviors. The smart play was to take what we could from the outer labs, leave the colonists to their fate, and disappear back into the nebula. We could sell the data on the curators to EarthGov for a king's ransom. We could live like gods. But I also saw the slow burn of rage in his gaze. It was the same rage I felt. A primal human fury against being dismissed, being labeled, being told our struggles and our very existence were nothing more than a curiosity for a higher being's collection. We were not art. We were people. The curator's calm, passionless voice was a greater insult than any threat. Interfering will change nothing. The projection continued. You are a footnote in a history that has already been written. Leave now, and we will not trouble ourselves with your insignificant vessel. Kale was silent for a long moment, the fate of 10,000 souls and a distant world resting on his shoulders. He looked from the curator to Ilara's desperate face, and then down at the silent, dreaming army in the pods. He finally looked back at the glowing entity, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his lips, a smile that was all rust and sharp edges. It wasn't the smile of a hero. It was the smile of a scavenger who had just found a new, more interesting way to break things. You're right about one thing, Kale said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp that cut through the alien's melodic thoughts. We do understand endings. He turned to me, and the command in his eyes was absolute. Get our tech team in here. I want every system on the ship mapped. I want to know how to control the stasis pods, the life support, the simulation itself. He then turned his gaze back to the curator, his smile widening. We're not just salvaging your tech. We're going to use it to tear your whole damn museum down. The curator's featureless face tilted, a gesture that conveyed an emotion somewhere between amusement and profound disappointment. To break is the only art your kind has ever truly mastered. The melodic thought echoed in our minds, laced with an ancient weariness. Very well. You have chosen your medium. Create your masterpiece of ruin. With that, the column of light dissolved, not vanishing in a flash, but fading like a dying ember, leaving the laboratory feeling colder and emptier than before. A heavy silence descended, thick with the unspoken question of what we had just started. Kyle didn't waste a second. He turned, his face a mask of cold resolve, and pointed a gauntleted finger at Jax, who was already unslinging a portable interface console from his back. Jax, you heard me. Get to work. I want the schematics for this whole damn mausoleum. Find me the controls for life support, gravity, and every single one of those pods. Vance, he said, his voice softening only a fraction as he addressed the doctor. You're with him. Tell him where the curators keep their secrets. Ilara Vance nodded, her eyes alight with a dangerous, long-suppressed fire. For the first time since we'd found her, she looked less like a victim and more like a saboteur. My team fanned out, securing the perimeter of the lab, our rifles pointed back down the silent, bone-white corridors. The true war began not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of Jax's console and the frantic dance of his fingers across its holographic interface. He patched directly into a terminal Ilara indicated, a seamless panel that rippled to life at her touch. I created a series of cascading backdoors in their primary data archives, she explained, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. They monitor for aggressive intrusion, but they never suspected quiet disobedience. I've been mapping their systems for years, leaving myself a trail. Jax grunted, his brow furrowed in concentration. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The architecture isn't binary. It's organic. More like a nervous system than a computer network. But your trail is good. Doc. I'm in. For a few minutes, there was a sense of fragile victory. Screens flickered with alien glyphs that Jax's translation software struggled to decipher, displaying partial schematics of power conduits and environmental controls. We were peeling back the skin of the beast. Then, the ship began to fight back. It started subtly. A low hum vibrated through the deck plates, a dissonant chord that seemed to scrape against the inside of my skull. The soft luminescence of the walls flickered, and for a split second, the polished white surfaces were overlaid with a fleeting, nightmarish image, a tangle of screaming faces, their features melting together like hot wax. I blinked, and it was gone. Did you see that I asked over my private comm to a squatty named Rorik? His reply was a shaky breath. See it, I felt it. Like ice water in my veins. The temperature in the lab dropped, our breath pluming in the air. The faint, sterile scent of ozone was replaced by something else, something deeply unsettling and familiar to every scrapper, the smell of a breached hull, of flash-frozen blood, and spilled oxygen. It was the scent of a tomb. The ship. It's reacting, Ilara said, her hand pressed against the terminal. It's accessing the colonists' corrupted dream files. It's weaponizing their nightmares. The assault intensified. On Jax's main screen, among the flowing lines of alien code, a single word appeared, written in plain English run. Whispers slithered at the edge of our hearing, formless and menacing, speaking our names. I saw a flicker of movement in the corridor and spun, my rifle raised. But there was nothing there but the long, curving hallway. Yet, for a moment, I could have sworn I saw my younger brother, Leo, the one we'd lost during the Titan quarantine collapse, his face pale and accusing. I shook my head, the cold sweat on my neck a stark reminder to stay focused. This was a trick, a phantom in the machine. They're trying to get inside our heads. Kale's voice boomed over the comm, a lifeline of cold, hard reality. It's a system, a defense mechanism. It's not real. Hold your ground. Jax, how are we doing? It's fighting me at every turn. Jax yelled, his knuckles white as he slammed commands into his console. It's not just a firewall, it's an intelligence. It's learning my methods, anticipating me. It's using their dream logic to reroute power and lock down systems. I can't get a handle on the main controls. The whispers grew louder, more personal. Rorik let out a sharp cry and stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror. "Get them off me," he screamed, swatting at his own armor. We saw nothing, but he was clearly in agony, trapped in a private hell projected directly into his mind. Two of my team dragged him back, forcing a sedative into his suit's medport. One down. We couldn't hold out like this for long. The ship was turning our own minds into cages. I felt a wave of crushing despair wash over me, a profound, soul-deep certainty that we were going to die here, forgotten in this silent, alien gallery. Our minds picked apart piece by piece. It was an artificial emotion, a poison injected into the air, but knowing that didn't make it any less potent. I gritted my teeth, focusing on the rough, worn grip of my rifle, on the solid reality of my own breathing. Then, Ilara gasped. "Wait, Jax, stop trying to take control. You're trying to fight it on its own terms. Don't seize the system. Corrupt it." Jax looked up, his face slick with sweat. "What are you talking about? The curators value purity, order. Their entire system is built on maintaining the delicate balance of the simulation. They're filtering out the colonists' psychic trauma, quarantining the nightmares to keep the core stable," she explained, her words coming in a rush. "What if we stopped filtering? What if we opened the floodgates?" A slow dangerous understanding dawned on Jax's face. "You want to weaponize the trauma, overload their processors with the very chaos they're trying to contain." He started typing again, his movements no longer a frantic battle, but a focused, surgical strike. He wasn't trying to break down doors anymore. He was unlocking them, releasing the prisoners in the ship's digital asylum. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The ship screamed, not a sound, but a psychic shockwave that threw us from our feet. The walls pulsed with a furious, blood-red light, and the images were no longer fleeting. We were plunged into a maelstrom of raw, unfiltered human suffering. I saw the colonists' final moments aboard the Arcadia, the confusion turning to terror as their ship went dark. I felt the collective heartbreak of 1,000 families being ripped apart, the primal fear of oblivion. I tasted the ash of burning worlds I'd never seen, and felt the ghosts of loves I'd never had. It was an ocean of pain, and we were drowning in it. But through the chaos, Jax had found a path. The ship's primary consciousness, the curator intelligence guiding it, was reeling, its processing power consumed by the sudden, massive influx of raw, chaotic data. It was the digital equivalent of a seizure. "I've got it," Jax roared over the psychic din. "I have access to the stasis pod network. I can't shut them down. Not from here, but I can change the protocol. I can initiate a system-wide emergency wake-up sequence." Kyle pulled himself to his feet, his face grim. "Wake them up and hear into this. It's the only leverage we have," Ilara insisted, her voice strained but firm. 10,000 minds waking at once, screaming and terrified, all connected to their network. The psychic feedback would cripple this vessel. It might even kill the curator entity controlling it. We can't save their minds as they are, but we can use their voices as a weapon. The choice was horrifying. To save humanity, we would have to sacrifice these humans, potentially shattering their minds by waking them from one nightmare into another. It was an act of profound cruelty, a violation on par with what the curators themselves had done. I looked at Kyle, waiting for his command. He was a scrapper, a man who had made a living from the wreckage of others' lives. I had seen him jettison cargo and the men guarding it to save his ship. He was a pragmatist, a survivor, but I had never seen him face a choice like this. His gaze drifted across the lab, past the convulsing Roric, past the terrified faces of my team, and settled on the viewing window overlooking the honeycomb of silent pods. He was looking at the faces of 10,000 men, women, and children, and weighing their sanity against the fate of billions. Just as he was about to speak, The air shimmered again. The curator reappeared, and this time there was no calm, no melodic condescension in its mental voice. There was only a storm of cold, silent fury. "You are vermin." The thought slammed into us, sharp as a shard of glass. "You would shatter a masterpiece rather than allow it to be preserved. The damage you are contemplating, it is an atrocity, an act of desecration." Kyle slowly turned to face the entity, his expression unreadable. He had made his decision. "You took their lives and called it art," he said, his voice low and hard as forged steel. "We're just giving them their voices back. Let's see what kind of art they make with it." He looked at Jax. "Do it. Wake them all up." Jax's fingers, slick with sweat, hovered over the holographic command prompt. The word execute glowed with a terrible, final light. He looked at Kale, his eyes wide with the enormity of the act, seeking a last-second reprieve that he knew wouldn't come. Kale simply nodded, his face a mask of grim finality. Jax took a shuddering breath and pressed the command. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the universe broke. It wasn't a sound. Sound is too small, too clean a word for what happened. It was a wave of pure, undiluted agony that slammed into our minds. A psychic tsunami cresting with the combined terror and confusion of 10,000 waking souls. The low hum of the ship was swallowed by a silent, soul-tearing scream that had no origin and no end. My teeth ached, and the taste of burnt copper filled my mouth as a trickle of blood ran from my nose. The deck plates vibrated violently, not from a mechanical tremor, but from the sheer psychic resonance of the event. Across the lab, the curator's form of woven light shattered. It didn't vanish. It flew apart like a crystal goblet struck by a hammer, its elegant form dissolving into a chaotic storm of shrieking, dissonant light. Its mental voice, once a serene melody, was now a chorus of screeching static, the death rattle of a god drowning in the pain of its creations. In the main chamber, the honeycomb of stasis pods erupted in a cascade of frantic light. The serene, sleeping faces were gone, replaced by masks of horror, bodies thrashed against their restraints, eyes snapping open to a reality they couldn't comprehend after 50 years of curated nightmares. Muffled, frantic pounding echoed from 1,000 pods at once, the frantic drumming of prisoners waking in their coffins. Some of the pods, unable to handle the sudden power surge, cracked, spiderwebbing with fractures as the desperate struggle within intensified. We were at ground zero of a soulquake, and it was tearing us apart. My vision swam, the bone-white walls bleeding into the hellish red of the emergency lights. My own fears, my own regrets rose up to choke me, amplified 1,000-fold by the psychic storm. I saw Leo's face again, not accusing this time, but terrified, his mouth open in a silent scream that merged with the chorus of the damned. "Finn, on your feet." Kyle's voice was a physical blow, a raw, human shout that cut through the psychic chaos. I looked up to see him braced against a console, blood streaming from one nostril, but his eyes were clear, burning with a ferocious, focused rage. He had made the monstrous choice, and now he would see it through. "Jax, download everything," he roared, his voice barely audible over the mental din. "All their data, ship logs, star charts, their whole goddamn encyclopedia of stolen souls. I want a record of this atrocity." Jax slumped over his console, shook his head as if to clear it of water. He coughed. spattering blood on the screen. But his fingers found the keys. Doing it. The main entity is down, but the ship's core systems are in chaos. I can't hold the connection for long, Elara. You're with us, Kale commanded, pulling the doctor to her feet. Her face was ashen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the waking horror she had helped unleash. The faces in those pods weren't anonymous to her. They were her friends, her colleagues. We are getting you and that data out of here, Kale said, his voice hard but not unkind. Rorik is a lost cause. Grab his rifle and his medkit. Finn, with me. We're cutting a path back to the airlock. Move. The retreat was a journey through hell. The ship itself seemed to be having a seizure. Corridors that had been serene and silent were now spasming with light and shadow. Gravity plating fluctuated wildly, threatening to send us tumbling into the ceiling one moment and crushing us with triple G force the next. Bulkheads slammed down at random, forcing us to reroute through darkened service tunnels that smelled of ozone and fear. And through it all, there was the noise, not the psychic scream anymore, that had subsided into a continuous, agonizing thrum, the baseline of 10,000 minds breaking. This was a physical sound now, the sickening crack of crystalline pods giving way, the wet, desperate gasps of people breathing real air for the first time in half a century, and the screaming, the raw, animal screams of people waking from a nightmare into a reality that was infinitely worse. We passed a section where a whole row of pods had shattered. Colonists, gaunt and pale as corpses, were crawling over each other, their minds completely gone. Some were catatonic, staring at the pulsing red walls with empty eyes. Others were violent, lashing out at anything that moved, their faces twisted in a rictus of permanent terror. We didn't engage. We couldn't. They weren't soldiers. They were victims. And we were the architects of their new torment. We pushed past, the shame a bitter pill in my throat. This wasn't salvation. This was a different kind of damnation. As we navigated a junction, a tendril of pure, white-hot energy, thick as a man's arm, lashed out from a side corridor. It wasn't a weapon. It was a raw, uncontrolled discharge of power. It struck the wall where I had been a second before, vaporizing the bone-like alloy and leaving a deep, molten scar. The curator's not dead, Elara shouted. It's destabilized, but its consciousness is still tied to the ship's power core. It's lashing out. The wounded god was fighting back, no longer with psychic tricks, but with the brute force of a dying star. The ship was its body, and it was thrashing in its death throes. We had to get out. Finally, we saw at the jagged, scorched hole we had cut in the hull hours, or was it a lifetime ago? Beyond it, the blackness of the nebula, and the familiar, ugly, beautiful silhouette of the Rust Eater magnetically clamped to the hull. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, surged in my chest. Jax, what's the status on that download? Kale barked into his comm. Almost there. Just a few more seconds. Got it. Jax's voice was a gasp of triumph. I've got everything. The Arcadia logs. The Curator's species database. Their plans for Earth. It's all here. Good. Now blow the terminal. Kyle ordered. Leave them nothing but ghosts. Jax didn't hesitate. A small muffled explosion echoed back from the lab, and Jax confirmed. Data core is slag. We reached the inner airlock, the last barrier between us and our ship. I slammed the activation panel. Nothing happened. The psychic storm and the Curator's death throes had fried the local circuits. It's no good. We'll have to cut it, I yelled, unslinging my own plasma cutter. As I prepared to fire, the entire corridor behind us began to glow with that same intense white light. The curator was pulling its scattered consciousness together for one final, desperate attack. It was no longer a formless tendril. The light was coalescing, taking on a monstrous, shifting shape at the far end of the hall. "Hurry," Alara screamed, her voice thin with panic. My cutter bit into the door, sending a shower of molten sparks into the corridor. The heat was intense, the noise deafening. Behind us, the light grew brighter, the air crackling with energy. I could feel the malevolent, shattered intelligence focusing on us, all of its pain and rage aimed at this one single point. With a final, groaning shriek of tortured metal, the inner door gave way, revealing the small, cramped space of the airlock and the outer hatch beyond. "Go, go now," Kale bellowed, pushing Alara and Jax through the opening. I scrambled after them, turning to provide covering fire, though I knew my pulse rifle would be useless against that thing. Kyle was the last one through. Just as he cleared the doorway, the entity unleashed its attack. A wave of pure kinetic force, visible as a ripple in the air, slammed into the portal. The bulkhead screamed and buckled inwards, the metal glowing cherry red from the heat. Kyle hit the emergency cycle for the outer hatch just as the weakened inner door was blown from its hinges, propelled into the airlock like a battering ram. We were thrown against the outer hatch by the force of the explosion, the airlock now a mangled wreck of twisted metal. But we were alive. And we were out. The outer hatch hissed open, revealing the cold, silent vacuum and the blessed, rusted hull of our home. We stumbled out, mag boots clamping us to the hull, and I turned to get a final look at the alien ship. The pristine, seamless black surface was no longer perfect. It was flickering, veins of red and white light racing across its hull like a fever. The ship was dying. We had won. Then, a new sound began, a low-frequency groan that vibrated through the hull of both ships. It was the screech of stressed metal. I looked down at the magnetic clamps holding the Rust Eater to the dying vessel. One by one, the indicator lights on the clamps began to flash from green to red. They weren't failing. They were being actively sheared off. The dying god wasn't just thrashing. It was trying to take us with it. The Rust Eater groaned in protest as the final clamp shrieked and gave way, the sound vibrating through the hull and into the marrow of our bones. We were adrift, a speck of rust and scavenged steel cast loose from the flank of a dying Leviathan. But we weren't free. The alien vessel, now a chaotic storm of spasming light and energy, seemed to exert its own terrible gravity. It was pulling us in, dragging us toward the swirling vortex of its own destruction. "Get us clear," Kyle roared into his comms as we scrambled through the airlock, the hiss of repressurization barely registering over the frantic pounding of my own heart. "Full reverse. Burn everything we've got." We stumbled onto the bridge, a cacophony of alarms and shouting. Our pilot, a wiry woman named Cass, whose knuckles were white on the controls, was fighting the ship with everything she had. I'm giving it all she's got. Cap main thrusters are at 120%, but she's got us in some kind of tractor field. It's like we're caught in a rip current. On the main screen, the curator ship filled the view, a terrifyingly beautiful spectacle of annihilation. The flawless black hull was fracturing, massive canyons of raw, white light erupting from its core. Debris was beginning to vent into space, not just shrapnel, but the chilling sight of shattered stasis pods. Their occupants flash frozen in the vacuum, eternal screams locked behind a veil of ice. We had done this. "We're not going to make it," Jax said, his voice hollow as he stared at the velocity readouts. He was clutching the data drive to his chest like a lifeline. It's building toward a core collapse. When that thing goes, the energy release will vaporize everything within 1,000 clicks. We're barely at 10. Kale stared at the screen. His jaw set so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He was a scrapper. He always had an angle, a trick, a way to cheat the odds. But this wasn't a busted engine or a pirate ambush. This was the wrath of a dying god. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine helplessness in his eyes. Then, Alara spoke up. She was standing near the nav station, her face pale but her eyes fixed on the screen with an intense, analytical focus. "It's not a tractor field," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's a psychic gravity well. The curator's consciousness is collapsing, pulling everything connected to it inward. But it's not a single, unified force anymore. It's fragmented." She pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Look at the energy patterns. There are fault lines, seams where the chaotic waking minds of the colonists are pushing back against the curator's control. There are gaps in the pull." Kyle looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You're saying we can thread the needle, find a seam, and ride it out." "It's theoretically possible," she said, "but I can't see the seams. Only the ship can. And their navigation system is completely alien." "Jax." Kale spun around. "Can you interface with our nav computer? Feed it the raw data you pulled from their systems? Can you show Cass where the holes are?" Jax looked at the data drive in his hands, then at the jury-rigged mess of our own navigation console. I can try. But the data is raw, unstructured. It'll be like trying to read a map drawn by a madman while on fire. And if I'm wrong, even by a fraction of a degree, we'll be torn apart. Better to die trying than to wait for the fireworks," Kale said, his voice iron again. "Do it. Cass, you're going to be flying blind, taking your cues from Jax. Trust him." Jax jacked the data drive into the console for a terrifying moment. Every screen on the bridge went black. Then they flared back to life, but not with our familiar star charts. Instead, the screens were filled with a chaotic, swirling mess of colors and patterns, a visual representation of the psychic storm raging outside. It was hypnotic and nauseating. "Okay," Jax breathed, his eyes darting across the madness. "Okay, I think I see it. Cass. Hard to port 3 degrees down." Now, Cass didn't hesitate. She slammed the yoke over, and the Rust Eater groaned, its thrusters fighting the invisible current. The ship lurched violently, throwing me against a bulkhead. The G-forces pressed me down, making it hard to breathe. Outside, the swirling lights grew brighter, closer. We were diving straight into the heart of the storm. "Correcting starboard, 5 degrees, up 2. Jax shouted, his voice rising in pitch. "There's a channel opening up. It's unstable, collapsing fast." We were flying through a tunnel of raw energy. On either side of us, the void was a maelstrom of violent purple and angry red. I could feel the ship's hull screaming under the strain, the rivets popping like gunfire. We were a tiny moth flitting through a bonfire. Warning, hull integrity at 60%. The ship's computer droned. It's calm. Synthetic voice, a bizarre contrast to the chaos around us. Engine core, temperature critical. Hold her together! Cass! Kyle yelled, braced against his command chair. Almost there. Jack screamed. Hold this course! Just a few more seconds. Ahead of us, a pinpoint of pure, unadulterated blackness appeared, the true void of space, free from the psychic storm. It was the eye of the needle. Punch it, Kale ordered. Cass slammed her hand down on the emergency boost. The Rust Eater screamed. Its engines pushed far beyond their limits. There was a blinding flash of light, a crushing wave of pressure that felt like it was trying to squeeze the very life out of my body. And then, silence. The violent shaking stopped. The G-forces released. We burst out of the maelstrom like a cork from a bottle, tumbling into the calm, silent darkness of the nebula behind us. The curator ship was a dying star. The light coalesced into a single, impossibly bright point, and then imploded. There was no sound, as of course, but the shockwave hit us seconds later. It wasn't a wave of fire, but a silent, expanding sphere of pure force. It struck the Rust Eater like the hand of God, sending us spinning uncontrollably, end over end. Alarms wailed, consoles sparked and died, and then the main power failed, plunged into darkness, spinning in the void. We were tossed like a toy. I don't know how long we drifted. Slowly. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the ruined bridge in a dim, red glow. One by one, we picked ourselves up, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Status report, Kyle croaked, wiping blood from his forehead. Cass was already at her console, her hands flying over the reboot sequence. We're dead in the water. Cap, main drive is slagged. Nav is offline. Comms are down. But life support is holding on reserve power. We're not leaking atmosphere. We made it. I whispered, unable to believe it. Jax was clutching the data drive, laughing a high, hysterical laugh that was half sob. We got it. We got everything. Their plans, their tech, their weaknesses. It's all here. We all looked at the small, unassuming drive in his hands. It was no longer just salvage. It was the future of our species. It was the vindication of 10,000 lost souls and the death warrant for the god that had tried to collect them. We spent the next 3 days drifting in the silence of the Caliban Nebula, licking our wounds and patching up our ship. We managed to jury-rig the sublight engines and get the distress beacon online. It was a weak signal, a whisper in the dark, but it was enough. On the 4th day, a colonial patrol cruiser found us. They didn't believe our story at first. Scrappers, criminals, spinning tales of ghost ships and alien gods. They were ready to lock us in the brig and impound our ship. Then, we showed them the data. We showed them the logs of the Arcadia. We showed them Ilara Vance. And we showed them the terrifying, detailed plans for the preservation of Earth. The mood on the cruiser changed from suspicion to a cold, professional dread. We were no longer prisoners. We were the bearers of the most important intelligence in human history. We were heroes. It was a title that felt ill-fitting, like a stolen coat. As we stood on the gleaming Austral bridge of the patrol cruiser, watching the battered, heroic hulk of the Rust Eater being towed into the hangar bay, I looked at Kyle. He was staring out at the stars, the same hard glint in his eyes. But something was different. The hunger for salvage was gone. replaced by something heavier. They wanted a masterpiece, he said, his voice low, echoing the words of the being we had killed. They wanted an ending free of pain and war. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a genuine, grim smile that reached his eyes. Well, we gave them an ending. All right. But the war is just getting started. And this time, we know exactly where to hit them. We were scrappers. We lived by picking over the bones of dead things. But now, we weren't just scavenging. We were bringing back the fire. We were bringing back the proof that even in the face of gods, humanity would not go gently into that good night. We would scream, we would fight, and we would break their perfect, silent cages. And we would make damn sure they heard us. The journey to Titan Prime was a blur of sterile corridors, debriefings in windowless rooms, and the scrutinizing gazes of men and women who wore their authority like a second skin. We were no longer a crew. We were a phenomenon, a collection of uncomfortable truths that EarthGov and the colonial authority didn't know how to file. They separated us, interrogated us, and ran psychological profiles that tried to neatly categorize the horrors we'd witnessed. They couldn't. The psychic scars left by the collector vessel were not something you could quantify in a report. Our ship, the Rust Eater, was quarantined, locked away in a high-security hangar, a piece of evidence too dangerous to touch and too valuable to scrap. We were reunited a week later in a cavernous briefing room deep within Titan's military command. The air was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen and quiet power. A semicircle of admirals and civilian attachés with cold, calculating eyes sat before us. They were the architects of humanity's future, and we were the dirty, inconvenient wrench in their 5-year plans. Admiral Thane, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from asteroid ice, stood at the head of the table. "We have analyzed the data," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "The veracity of your claims regarding the entity known as the Curators and the fate of the colony ship Arcadia has been confirmed." He said the word confirmed as if it tasted like poison. We are facing an existential threat of unprecedented scale. On the massive holo display behind him, the data Jax had stolen blossomed into a terrifying narrative. We saw the Curator's star charts, vast and ancient, with dozens of other species marked as archived. We saw their meticulous analysis of human psychology, our art, our wars, our capacity for love and for self-destruction, all cataloged with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying microbes. And we saw the plan for Earth. It wasn't an invasion schematic. It was a timetable, a calm, orderly schedule for the deployment of a fleet of collector vessels, timed to coincide with a projected period of peak global instability they had calculated we would reach in the next 2 decades. They weren't coming to fight us. They were coming to harvest us at our ripest, most tragic moment. Our strategists have concluded that a conventional military response is our only viable option. Thane continued. We will fortify the Sol system, accelerate production of the new Aegis-class destroyers, and prepare for a war of attrition. A low, grating sound cut through the respectful silence. It was Kyle, scraping his chair back as he stood up. He looked haggard, his face still bruised, but his eyes were chips of flint. He looked at the assembled command, not with deference, but with a weary pity. "You're going to lose," he said, his voice a low rasp that carried across the vast room. Every eye snapped to him. You're going to build your shiny new ships, line them up in perfect formation, and they will pick you apart without firing a single shot. You think you're fighting a war. They think they're putting down a rabid animal before it hurts itself. You want to fight them with guns. They'll turn your guns into paperweights. You want to fight them with fleets. They'll put your fleets to sleep. And what would you suggest? Captain Rourke Thane asked, his voice dripping with condescension. That we surrender to these collectors? No, Cale said, walking slowly toward the table. I suggest you stop thinking like soldiers. You need to start thinking like scrappers. You don't fight a god head-on. You find out what it prays to, and you poison the altar. He looked at Alara, then at Jax. Their greatest strength is their network, their perfect, orderly system, their belief in their own serene, artistic purpose, and their greatest weakness is us. Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. The data Jax recovered wasn't just their plans. It was the raw, unsanitized neurosensory data from the Arcadia's failing simulation. It's a record of 50 years of human suffering. The very chaos the curator entity couldn't contain. It's a weapon. A psychic contagion, Jax added, the manic spark back in his eyes. We can weaponize it. Package that raw data, all the pain, the fear, the broken memories, as a system update for their network. The curators believe they're sharing art, preserving beauty. We can send them a masterpiece of our own, a monument to human agony. We can't just fight their ships. We have to infect their very idea of us. The room was silent, the Admiral staring at this ragged trio of outcasts proposing a strategy of metaphysical warfare. It was insane. It was unthinkable. And it was the only thing that had the ring of truth. We can't do it from here, Cale said. His gaze locked on Admiral Thane. Their network is too shielded. You need a ship that can get in close, a ghost that can slip through their sensor nets, a ship they won't be looking for, crewed by people who are already dead. He let the words hang in the air. You need the Rust Eater, and you need us. In the end, they had no other choice. They couldn't risk a full-scale war they knew they would lose, and they couldn't ignore the weapon that had fallen into their laps. So, in the deepest, most secret hangar on Titan, a new kind of warship was born from the bones of an old one. The Rust Eater was gutted and rebuilt. They reinforced her hull with stolen Curator alloys, integrated their stealth systems, and installed a long-range broadcast antenna capable of piercing the Curator network. They kept her ugly, kept her looking like nothing more than a derelict scavenger, but beneath her rusted skin, she was a dagger. We renamed her. She was now the Echo, for the ghosts of the Arcadia she carried, and for the message we were about to send. Our crew, what was left of us, became the first operatives in a war that would have no parades, no medals, no formal declarations. We were ghosts, tasked with committing an act of terror to save our species. Our final mission briefing wasn't in a grand hall, but on the bridge of the Echo, floating in the silent dark beyond Jupiter's orbit. Alara had refined the psychic virus, encoding it, shaping it into a form the Curator network would accept as a valid data packet. Jax had plotted a course through a series of dead zones and gravitational anomalies, a scrapper's route that would take us to the edge of a known collector patrol vector. Before the final jump, Cale gathered us on the bridge. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at each of us, his gaze lingering for a moment, acknowledging the impossible journey we had taken. "We were carrion birds," he said, his voice quiet. "We lived off the endings of other people's stories. Today, we get to write one of our own. It won't be pretty. They won't build statues of us, but they'll remember what we did here." He looked out at the starfield on the main screen. "They wanted to collect us, put us on a shelf. Let's show them what happens when a piece of the collection learns how to scream back." Then, we were gone. We jumped into the deep black, a rust bucket full of ghosts on our way to poison a god. We found their ship, a silent, obsidian seed hanging in the void, just as they had found the Arcadia. But we didn't board. We didn't fight. We stayed in the shadows, a ghost in their machine. Jax opened the channel. The psychic virus, the condensed, weaponized soul of 10,000 murdered colonists, streamed from our antenna, a silent, invisible spear of pure human sorrow aimed at the heart of an empire. We didn't know if it would work. We didn't know if it would be a pinprick or a killing blow. But as the upload completed and we turned to flee back into the darkness, I looked back at the collector vessel on the screen. A flicker of red light, like a single drop of blood, pulsed across its perfect, black hull. It was a flaw, a wound. It was the first sign that the art of preservation was about to learn the art of pain. We were no longer scrappers, picking over the dead. We were the reapers, and this was our harvest. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, in the cold, silent dark of space, we had given humanity's ghost a voice, and we knew, with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that the entire galaxy was about to hear it.